Could the representative
Yeah.
also do that?
No, we will assist.
And
We will assist.
Okay.
We will assist. Mr. Vimba, you were on the floor. My sincere apologies that we disturbed your input.
We're just conversing
You still have your 10 minutes.
whether we should continue to address or we just
Discussion.
No, let's have a
discussion.
conversation.
Yeah.
But you'll direct us.
Maybe I will start just to summarize
Yes.
my input. I was just giving a perspective about MESA in terms of the experience that we have had supporting municipalities and the challenges that municipalities are facing. And recently we did a comprehensive state of local government report together with SALG. I think we also participated, all provincial COGTAs, national treasurer, and as well as provincial treasurers. And the state of local government report, among other things, state that municipalities have challenges ranging from political, as we know, governance, institutional, financial, and service delivery. It also highlighted that 64 municipalities are dysfunctional. That I think we know. That was in 2021. The year later, in 2022, a review of the state of local government was done. And it also further highlighted that the situation had worsened and the number of dysfunctional municipalities had increased from 64 to 66. And we are saying there are a number of reasons for this. One of the major challenges is the lack of built environment professionals, especially engineers. This challenge results in municipalities not having the capacity for infrastructure development. And infrastructure development, the value chain, is from cradle to grave, requires different professional input at every stage of the project life cycle. It also requires professional input during operation and maintenance. And the absence of this professional capacity results in municipalities not implementing projects successfully. We have a situation, for instance, of a misalignment of bulk and reticulation. There were about 18 water service authorities with that kind of a situation, a substandard work and lack of operations and maintenance. And we say all this can be summed up as poor infrastructure development. And this results in poor infrastructure grant expenditure and ultimately poor service delivery and government not fulfilling the constitutional rights of citizens to dignity and water specifically. And we say it goes without saying, therefore, that poor state of municipalities resulting in poor service delivery infringes of the citizens' human rights. There is also a widespread agreement that under the right conditions, investment in basic infrastructure can help to reduce inequality and poverty. Professor Albert Modi of the University of KwaZulu-Natal has written a very clear account of the nexus between food, water, and energy. He says, to grow food, we need water and energy. To provide water, we need energy. And to provide energy, we need water. Now, the nexus between food, energy, and water also links directly to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That is why if you look at each individual SDG, you will quickly realize that at least 15 of the 17 are linked to infrastructure delivery. The district development model, therefore, seeks to buttress this nexus by forging cross-sectoral collaboration, integrated and coordinated planning. So this is a challenge currently. sectors, they plan along the sector lines, and they don't look at what is the impact of their plans to energy, to food, to all those things. And we're saying this is what I think collectively we need to look at and try to address. And the nexus planning in delivering services is thus critical to ensure fulfillment of human rights of citizens' access to sustainable basic services. Even though delivery of infrastructure has increased over the past years, the demand for infrastructure is still huge. Municipalities therefore need to mobilize the broadest possible range of resources to fund infrastructure. There are four broad sources of capital finance for municipal infrastructure. It's grants from national government, public contributions and donations, internally generated funds, and borrowing. And due to contraction of the national fiscus, the conditional grants transfers have been declining over the past few years. And this trend is likely going to persist, slowing down infrastructure development. Most municipalities cannot borrow due to little or no revenue base. Revenues from services which municipalities are providing to consumers are significantly declining as citizens curtail their consumption. These challenges have also been perpetuated by the impact of COVID-19. Municipalities must therefore be supported to optimize alternative sources of funding that are currently available locally and globally. This is a challenge that I think we have got to really put our heads together. How do we enable the borrowing framework in such a way that municipalities who do not even have revenue base can also participate in terms of borrowing? Currently, it's a challenge that we think we must deal with. Then coming to the next question, Program Facilitator, the role of administrative capacity and governance in state of infrastructure in municipalities. Over the years, government has emphasized the need for public institutions to be capable, putting forward capacity building and other supportive measures as the answer, or at least a major contribution to the answer for improvement of service delivery. That end, MISA was formed to provide technical support to municipalities and build capacity so that a technical skills pipeline is created. And we've got a number of programs to this effect. But besides providing professionals, MISA also support municipalities with tools like the unit cost guidelines. There have been an outcry about contractors overcharging municipalities and so forth. So we've decided in partnership with the city to develop a unit cost guidelines to assist municipalities in pricing infrastructure. And of course, we're also building the design capacity within MISA. We've already procured software packages for design, and we've put together a design team that is meant to build internal capacity to support municipalities with designing. We're piloting this in OR Tambo. Government has also introduced the district development model so that all government plan, budget, and implement government programs and projects in a coordinated manner and aim to avoid fragmentation. National Treasurer recently published a report, it was in March this year, on the capacity of the state and the professionalization of public service. The report accurately notes that the challenge is not the skills level of the bureaucrats per se. It is not the number of engineers we have, though that can still be improved. It is the environment within which they operate that militates against their ability to optimize their talents. This environment has in part to do with the politics administration interface and the compliance regime that makes service delivery secondary to financial prudence. In a municipality, for instance, the head of infrastructure has less agency than the supply chain manager, even on infrastructure-related matters. I must also display, there's a myth that public officials are inept and lethargic. A South African municipality, a program director, is the most complex organization to run in South Africa. It is allocated 15 Schedule 4B powers and functions and 23 Schedule 5B functions. Add to this, there are a number of other functions that an engineer is expected to perform. One of those would be reporting to provincial and national departments. This put a serious burden on the municipal officials. And there are more than 150 pieces of legislation impacting on local government. And according to Professor Gio Quinot of the University of Stellenbosch Law School, there are at least 84 passages of legislation directly and indirectly impacting municipal infrastructure procurement. Provincial and national government have at most 4 powers and functions, and have even devolved some of these to agencies. Maybe a program director, we must ask how other countries do it. And in fact, let us just look at South Africa before 1994. The municipal engineer was called city engineer. This role was strategically isolated from the work of the town clerk, who is today the municipal manager. Procurement, though unlegislated then, was an engineering function, but today procurement is the finance function. Finance decide, the kind and quality of infrastructure you then develop. This has had a huge impact in terms of the delivery of sustainable quality infrastructure in our country. And the elephant in the room, Chair, I think we've got to look into the complex nature which we have ourselves created in local government, and if possible, simplify local government, review the 150 pieces of legislation, have few legislative instruments that will enable the performance of municipal officials to deliver on their contracts. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Vimba. I think 3 key proposals that you are tabling linked to the problem statement, issues around mobilizing resources and increasing access to different funding opportunities, and you've highlighted 4 of those. Within the context of your problem statements to support a view that local government is complex, you are also proposing that we need to review a number of things, including legislative prescripts and reporting requirements. And then lastly, you are proposing that perhaps a way forward is to create platforms and space for sharing of knowledge and experience across borders, country borders. So those are key proposals that we will take through, but we will engage first on what you are proposing. Ms. Buthelezi, can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Program Director. Firstly, I must say it gives me great pleasure to sit here and to discuss this very crucial topic of municipal infrastructure with you today, particularly if we piggyback and stem from where the President left us off. And he spoke to us about initiatives such as the DDM, such as the multidisciplinary teams that have been created, such as the municipal key performance areas, and the fact that it is very important for us to step back, diagnose the situation, try and come up with solutions, and then implement fully the solutions that we come up with. So it is very important that in this quorum today, we take that with us, because that is exactly where a lot of our problems are coming from. Mr. Vimba here has covered a lot of my points, and in the interest of time, I think he has thoroughly discussed the aspect of human rights. He's thoroughly gone through the aspect of human rights and infrastructure and the involvement of that. And it may seem counterintuitive at first to consider how people who design the buildings, the roads, the bridges, the water reticulation, the power grids, and so many other thousand types of infrastructure we need in our daily use today can be human rights champions. But when we think about it, we'll soon grasp that without the solid municipal infrastructure, which we often take for granted, I think if we heard what the president spoke about in terms of arson, every time we want to put our point across, the first place we go to is to destroy the very same infrastructure that we need. People's human rights will remain unfulfilled. We need to start talking about that. We need to start creating awareness. And we need to start putting people to book when they do act in the manner that is arson and destroying the very same infrastructure that we need. Because tomorrow we're going to come back and say it is our right to have water. It is our constitutional right to have water. Whereas last week we went and we destroyed the very same chamber that is going to assist us with the delivery of water. So in my deliberation, I'll examine the role of engineers in ensuring that human rights through the provision and the maintenance of municipal structures, and what the Engineering Council of South Africa, which is an organization that I am honored to lead, is doing to support them and to assist, especially with the issue that Mr. Vimba discussed today of professional registered engineers, technologists, and technicians. So as the Engineering Council of South Africa, we are mandated by the Engineering Professions Act, number 46 of 2000. And the main disciplines of the engineering that we are currently governing are premised between the chemical, civil, electrical, mechanical, bioelectrical, amongst others such as your aerospace, your marine, your computer, your geological engineer. And I think today my fellow panelists mentioned something we should consider as the municipal engineer. We are open to that conversation, particularly because we do not want to leave anyone out. We want to move together collectively, but understanding that it is important to hold one another accountable, because we are working in the premise of the Act, what regulates, what mandates the Engineering Council of South Africa. So many of these disciplines are involved in the municipal infrastructure provisions, such as you mentioned, the design, the operations, the maintenance, and amongst others. We cannot leave engineers out of policy development. We cannot just say engineers for our municipalities should just be putting their heads down and do what they need to do and apply them only as the tool. They are not just a tool. We need to start bringing engineers out of being a tool. We need to start including them in the policy making, in the decisions, in the boardroom, in leadership roles, because not only are they technically inclined to solve problems, but their role is to solve problems. And Mr. Vimba, you mentioned something very critical. 15 of the 17 sustainable goals of the UN are linked to infrastructure. But colleagues, 17 out of 17 of those goals are linked to human rights. We cannot ignore that. And that is the role that engineers also crucially play, together in the nexus of water, of food. And the last one was? Energy. We cannot ignore that. So the enforcement of the profession's code of ethics and practice is something that is very important as we deliberate in the municipal infrastructure issues. Because not only did Mr. Vimba also mention the issues of corruption, the issues of push and pull factors, the issues of forces. These include, for EXA, the Engineering Council of South Africa's Code of Conduct, the Code of Practice for the performance of engineering work. Educational responsibilities include the accreditation of universities for engineering degree courses, the active driving of engineering education initiatives, the continuation of professional development, and what EXA prides itself of is the establishment of EXA's Certified Engineering Training Academy. And we have done this as EXA with the very first organization in partnership with Bosch Ulwazi, which is an organization that is saying we are aware of the gaps between our higher education and our training. We understand most of our engineering practitioners don't have the tacit experience that they require, and we would like to play a role right in the middle by being an academic institution and provide the necessary experience that is required. The second organization that has put their hand up is Rand Water, which is a water utility board. Again, in the same line of thinking that says we want to partner with EXA so that we are certified as a EXA accredited academy. So I encourage organizations out there in the municipal space to partner with EXA so as to ensure that we work together in ensuring that we're building the skills that are not easily attainable and can only be attainable through tested experience. It cannot be attained in a classroom. We must acknowledge that. It is not enough to get a degree. You do need to get the experience. So let's partner to ensure that our engineers attain the skills that is required. This academy provides a structured and systematic training for candidates, technicians, technologists, engineers, helping them to fast-track their professional registration and directly addressing the gap in engineering skills pipeline. It is also there to ensure that candidates receive quality structured on-the-job engineering experience. The second offering of EXA in terms of our mandate is what we call the identification of engineering work. And this is an important initiative by the Engineering Professions Act, which entails that the engineering activities performed by a person registered in EXA should only be conducted by a person qualified in that category. It is a demarcation of the type of work to be performed by one category of registered from another. So what we're trying to say here, we are regulating the engineering profession. You will conduct work that you have been qualified to conduct, that you have been registered to conduct. A requirement for a registered person to possess a core competency to perform the work in appropriate category of registration. So the initiative at OR Tambo, we trust and we are willing to work with you so as to ensure that we have strengthened the identification of engineering work. Only those people who are registered to perform a particular role should be performing that particular role. Of course, this does not mean we leave anybody out. We are willing to ensure that we mentor and we assess those engineers that do not have the necessary registration so that they also can be ready to perform the very same work. The purpose of the identification of engineering work is to ensure that the highest standard in engineering professions and ensure that only appropriate, qualified, experienced, registered engineers perform specific type of engineering work. It is done in other professions. It can be done by the engineering profession. And we need your support in the municipal space to achieve that. This identification of engineering work was gazetted in 2021 and is currently conducting industrial, and EXA is currently conducting industry consultation on implementation and compliance. We have started in the public sector, so I am aware that we have reached out to some of our colleagues in the public sector. Therefore, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, in summary, it is clear that creating and ongoing maintenance of municipal infrastructure is vital, not only to our economy, but to the realization of our fellow South African citizens. And we have agreed to that today. And as a statutory body for the engineering profession, EXA, we strive to maintain the highest professional standards and drive transformation within the profession in doing, promoting, and ensuring that human rights are always upheld at all times. Engineers have an outsized role to play in supporting human rights through infrastructure provision in myriad ways, such as policymakers, as we spoke about earlier, as designers, as builders of infrastructure, as maintenance of this very same infrastructure, and as thought leaders within and outside of government around the importance of infrastructure to our country and all the people who live in it. I thus call upon all of you here today and those people I see online, in particular, to always embrace the essential contributions that engineers make, not only in physical infrastructure matters such as clean water, functional roads, and to growing our economy, but to the promotion and preservation of our citizens, human rights, and the state that we live in as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Buthelezi. I think you did very well by zooming into what we want is solutions and how we could respond to the difficulties that Mr. Vimba indeed outlined. There are three key proposals that are emerging. In fact, four. The first one, let's not try go into the detail now, but look at ensuring that we implement the plans that we have developed. Secondly, that we need to perhaps do a little bit of work on the increasing educational work, on increasing the understanding of the impact of destroying public service delivery infrastructure. Communities to understand the impact thereof. And there are many examples currently. You can go to town in outlining many of them. I thought one key proposal that has a number of subcomponents to it is ensuring, firstly, that we, on a continuous basis, capacitate engineers through ongoing training. And in so doing, partner with relevant institutions for both the theoretical but also the practical experiences. Secondly, you may not be saying it directly, and you must indicate if you disagree. You are suggesting full professionalization of the engineering function in a municipality, and it relates quite well with current conversations around professionalization. You are also indicating, if not demanding, that whilst we are dealing with capacitating new, but also build the relevant programs for engineers at a tertiary level, must also groom them to become part of not only the planning, but also the decision making within our municipalities. I've covered the issue about collaboration. And then lastly, a very important proposal. Can those that are qualified to do the work, and that we don't have fly-by-nights. And there are many of them in the space that we operate in. And that could also be linked to what we could discuss at length. If we are going to only allow those that are duly qualified to do that work around engineering services, we must also in the same breath say they must also be held accountable, and there must be consequences where there's wrong. Key proposals coming from you, we would allow the contributions that will come from the floor to add to those. Mr. Mazwime, you are not last because we all have 5 minutes still.
Okay.
10 minutes for you starting.
All right, thank you. As a way of background, though I'm an academic, I have done the bulk of my career in municipal engineering. And one of the things that I have realized, in fact, there's a guy called Karl Martens who wrote a book about it. It's called Infrastructure Transport Justice. So he argues that if you go to a community, let's take an example with Alexandra. if we go to Alexandra and we decide that the generation of people who are living in Alexandra today, we are going to build public infrastructure for them. And when we build it, we're not going to look at the type of people we are building it for. We are going to go all out as if we are building it in Alexandra, in Sandton. He argues that will then increase their mobility and their access to amenities. That generation, if it's poor, will be the last generation to be poor. So this his research was done mostly in Europe and so on. And he realized the poorest communities, once they got the infrastructure and the amenities, the next generation was just as good as the others. Unfortunately, engineers are trained in project selection as well. One of the most common ways is multiple criteria analysis, cost benefit analysis. In our thinking, we would say the people in Alex, what is the income level there? The people in Sandton, what is the income level? And if an executive in Sandton cannot get to the office on time, the economy loses this amount of money, which then means jobs are not going to be created for the person in Alexandra. So we get preoccupied with debottlenecking Sandton and completely neglect Alexandra. But now research has clearly shown that if we invest in Alex, what we have invested in Sandton, the next generation of Alex will be like Sandton. So if you dedicate resources, so I see this a lot in City of Cape Town, because that's where I'm living now. In City of Cape Town, after people were moved to places like Langa and so on, the infrastructure they were given was not the same as the infrastructure that you find in Hout Bay where I live. In fact, even in Hout Bay where I live, there's an informal settlement called Imizamo Yethu. I can leave my house in the morning and come back and see that a pothole had developed because water came out and it's already closed. But in Imizamo Yethu, where I go to cut my hair and to buy magunya all the time, the roads get finished. They're only done during elections. They get so dilapidated. But over and above that, the roads are substandard in terms of their width. They're under-designed, so they make sure that they are very narrow. Because they are narrow, there was an incident that happens every year actually, but last year, that's why I witnessed it myself. The fire truck couldn't get to a certain shack, and a pregnant woman died with a 6-year-old son. And people became violent because they said, we told the fire department, and by the way, the fire department is based in the informal settlement. The road depot is based within Imizamo Yethu. All the services, the depots are in the informal settlement, but they live to serve only outside. And it's not really a Western Cape problem per se. It's just that there it seems to be more accentuated. But the point is that if you design narrow roads, what do you get in turn? The fire truck cannot reach certain areas, but the garbage truck as well. So then people dump. When it rains, the drains are blocked, sewer comes out, and people in everywhere would be saying, those people are very dirty, they are not. But the issue is that the engineer designed substandard roads. The second issue is to do with, because the second human rights issue has to do with poor municipalities. Two of my final year students were doing their research projects on roads in two poor municipalities, one in Free State, the other one in Eastern Cape. They sat down and looked at all the roads through Google Maps and zoomed in to look at the state of each road. Then went to the municipal budgets to see what has been the budget for roads over the last 10 years. Then they made projection that at the rate at which these municipalities are funded, it will take 150 years to service all the roads if we can freeze the deterioration of the roads. But in 150 years, the roads are also deteriorating. So the funding formula for equitable share was, it's got all the elements that are supposed to be there, but the factors are wrong. And the best way to do it would be to say, let's now look back. If you make a formula, you know that you have covered all the important factors that play a role. But poor municipalities are getting poorer in terms of infrastructure and everything. And the richer municipalities are getting richer. We had a meeting with one of the deputy mayors of City of Cape Town. And he was saying that our problem is not the lack of funds to do things. Our problem is that because of compliance, the rate at which we can spend funds is too slow. We have got almost 40 billion in our reserves. So they're essentially saying everything they wanted to do, if it was not for the delays, they would have been able to do it. The second issue that is very inhibitive in infrastructure development is procurement. I think in the discussions that we have had, our procurement regime was not made in a room where there were engineers. There were finance people who were thinking about compliance. In fact, the 3-committee system, there will be one engineer in bid spec, one engineer in bid evaluation, and if you are lucky, there will be one engineer in bid adjudication. But the law doesn't allow the same engineer to sit on all of them. And most municipalities have one engineer. So what is happening? It means somewhere there is a place where only the finance people, as you said, legal, internal audit, and supply chain are sitting. And there's no engineering input. I have sat in some of those committees where we're evaluating a bid. A company has done a 250 millimeter diameter storage pipe. We're adjudicating a 1000 millimeter steel pipe for potable water. Under pressure, it's a rising main. And the person who's evaluating from supply chain is scoring that, these people have done pipes before. So I am saying to him that sewer pipe is so different from the water pipe that it's just really coincidence that they are called pipes if you think about the work that's going to go there. Because the other one needs cathodic protection, which only about 5-6 companies can do in the country. Because of pressure as well, levels are not an issue. There are special welding requirements. You can't do butt welding. There's only arc welding works when a pipe is that big. But I cannot convince a supply chain person on something like that. So procurement has been taken, and what we have been saying, take procurement, make it an engineering function, because it is. The engineering process starts with the planning, where the town planners are also there. They provide the canvas. We go into design, preliminary design, detailed design. We go into procurement, and then from procurement, construction, and then maintenance. But it looks like our legislative system took the procurement part and say, no, this one is no longer your responsibility. And I think that has also added to corruption. In fact, the spending on capital grants, in the last financial year, none of the metros spent more than 80% of their infrastructure grants. More than 40% of the municipalities spent less than 60% of their grants. And I am preferring to use figures from before COVID, and now just after COVID. The issue is supply chain. I have a personal experience from a municipality where when I decided that I'm not going to allow a supply chain manager to decide who gets the contract, he gave an instruction to all his staff members. All procurement that comes from Kundo's cluster, we must collapse the sitting of the committees. So when they come, we sit down, we are doing bid spec, they must find something and raise it and say, we can't sit today, let's postpone. So the idea was, because we are evaluated on how much we have spent, once you have underperformed, that is a way of pushing you out of the municipalities, and you'll get somebody that you will tell, if you are not allowing me to choose who's going to work, then you will go the same route as the previous one. The second thing with the expenditure on grants is that municipal infrastructure grant, which is the premium grant for municipal infrastructure, in COGTA does not sit with MISA. It sits with COGTA, the mother body, and the engineers sit in MISA. So you have this challenge where you submit a business plan and say, can you fund this road? It's 1 kilometer and it's going to cost 7 million rands. Then an economist, and I'm using real examples only, will say, but the other municipality did 1 kilometer for 5 million rands. Why is yours going to 7 or 8 million rands? Then I would say the bearing capacity of Mont Morello Night Clay is very low. We will need a lot of dump rock. And I'm talking to an economist. And the economist believes that your municipality is corrupt. Because there are some certain municipalities that in the media, and interestingly, when I was in Midvaal, that was not a problem. But when I went to Mfuleni, it became a big issue, and even though I was the same person. So I just felt if we had engineers sitting here and we would be talking, we will show them the geotech report, because I had the geotech report and said, yeah, look at the grading, because that's just a graph going like this. There's no way that you can explain it to economists. The issue of administrative capacity. The CEO put it well. It's not a question of capacity as such. You know, my head of school, Professor Moyo, always says, if you tell us as engineers, take Table Mountain and dump it into the sea, we're giving you 10 years, we can do it. It is the administrative process of how you should do it, who you must choose to do it, you know, and all the other things. But there is no lack of engineering capacity in South Africa. South African engineers are sought after all over the world. Secondly, today, South Africa has the highest number of engineers than it has ever had at any time in its history. In 1980, when the sanctions were becoming too much, the government commissioned Professor Johan de Lange to look at which skills we needed in the country. And engineering came out tops. But the challenge was that Black students were not allowed to study engineering. It was reserved for white students. And de Lange was saying, all the white kids that want to study engineering are studying it. The only way is to open this to the other races. But if we do that, by year 2000, this country will have the same number of Black as it has white engineers. Well, of course, the government couldn't accept that and decided to set up offices across Europe to recruit at a higher cost engineers to come into the country. 1993, 92, the floodgates were opened, and we have those engineers now. There are so many of them. But whoever designed our framework when we were transitioning, something that Patrick Bond writes very well about in a book called Transition. It was designed in such a way that the municipality must be so incapacitated that everything must be outsourced. How many municipalities can design, have a design office software? We train our engineers straight from varsity. They can design a credible road that you can, especially the rural ones. They can design them well because they are hardly any complexities. But if you leave university and go to a municipality, you will not get registered. And I'm very happy that the president of EXA has warmed up very quickly to the idea that there is a skill called a municipal engineer. President Mbeki introduced a course with the University of Pretoria and 2 other universities across the continent, Makerere and another one. It was called Municipal Infrastructure Management, but it was done from a public administration perspective. That gave engineers an opportunity to reflect on their engineering in the context of legislation. That course was only offered once, and I was lucky to be one of the, I think, 10 engineers that enrolled. Your ideas will play into that space, and I think they will go a long way in assisting. So with my last 29 seconds, I want to say, one, let's separate procurement for infrastructure from general procurement. In other countries, they talk about goods, services, and works. In South Africa, it's goods and services, they stop there. So the same way you're going to buy furniture, you're going to build a road with all the geotechnical uncertainties and everything that come with it. And the same people who sit in the bid committee for buying furniture are the same people that sit in the bid committee for infrastructure. The issue of water governance infrastructure, we cannot address it at once because it's a very special case. Most of the time, we fail to look back at why we are where we are. Water is the only area in all areas of South African legislation where there's only been 3 pieces of legislation since 1913. The 1913 Act was making water about agriculture. The 1956 Act made water about secondary industries and mining. It was only the 1999 Act that we're using now that made water to be about people. But what we fail to realize is that all those times, the farmers and their organizations were running water schemes. Then 1956, the mining houses were running water schemes. It was not about residents, and they were putting their money. This is the first dispensation where government has to take over the responsibility of running water. And hence, there is a move now. People are taking municipalities to court and say, we want to take over the water function. And they normally call themselves community. It's not community. There's no one in the community who wakes up and say, I want to go and run the water if you are employed. It is the proxies for the mining houses and the industries that are realizing that withdrawing, pulling away from participating in water governance has actually hit their industries also very hard because they actually depend on water. So when the president says we need a social compact, I think they need to be brought in to say, whatever it is you want to do, let's do it with the municipality. So I'm just summarizing that one. The other thing is, this is for EXA. I'm happy that you're looking at skills, who must do what. The engineers and the technologists and technicians, they are not trained the same. But I've seen an effort to make them the same. In fact, many municipalities, when they advertise, they say an engineer or a technologist or a technician. Many people in municipalities don't know that distinction, that there is a limitation, that it's not that the one is superior to another. You can't have a hospital that is only having physiotherapists. The doctor is an integrating function. He knows when the physiotherapist will come in. He knows, and this the technician is trained in class for 2 years, really, and then released to do in-service training. The other ones is for 4 years. Some of the challenges we are having is that, I mean, engineers look at an advert that says engineer technologies. We won't apply for they won't apply for something like that. You know, if you advertise a position in a hospital, we want a doctor or a nurse, or we want a doctor or a dietitian for this position. The dietitians will find it easy to apply. So municipalities have now been dominated with the technicians, but at the exclusion of engineers. There are so many engineers, and many are even leaving the country. So I think those are some of the things that we have to be very emphatic when we talk. I know it's not a popular topic in the space. Okay, I'll stop there because.
Yes. No, thanks for concluding on the 29 seconds.
That was the longest 29 seconds.
Yeah, but I'm happy you are saying. I think quite useful contribution in showing us the practical side of things, number of proposals, some interlinked with earlier suggestions that we need to perhaps look at. I thought it's an important point that you're making around sustaining a single standard. I'm translating your words more simply. Creating the same standard, it doesn't matter whether you are directing the infrastructure to an affluent area or a non-affluent area. And unfortunately, that's the biggest problem we have. When we identify the provision of services, we are looking at the beneficiary to determine the type of service we are going to, in terms of quality that we are going to extend, which is
Perpetuate inequality.
yeah. And I think it long-term compromises even the provision of that service. It's just a useful proposal for us to look at. You have also raised the issue interlinked with earlier issue raised by Mr. Vimba around funding, but you are more specific around revisiting the funding formula so that it is more responsive to the demands and not twisted. Otherwise, we will never respond to the realities that are out there, and the realities are determined by demand. So that's a good proposal. And then unblocking the red tape linked to and bureaucratic processes. And one thing we excel in government, it is not because we really want to take long with things. We don't trust each other.
It's true.
Very simple, very simple thing. I killed in the organization where I work. There's no 5 signatories to a report. Have you seen a report that goes anywhere? It is developed by this one, checked by this one, blah, blah, blah. So there are 5 signatories on one report. There's only one person that wrote the report, it's the first signatory. The others are not even amending the report. But there are 5 signatures. Why? Because we don't trust each other. It's trust. So we can reduce the red tape and have less bureaucracy just by trusting each other. Because surely when we appoint people, we want the best people. And because you have the best people, you will trust them.
Even the plethora of legislation we have, it's because of lack of trust.
Exactly. So red tape reduction is necessary. But there are 2 things that you are actually raising. One is a capacity issue, and you are making a specific proposal around ensuring that when we deal with infrastructure, that we have the necessary capacity, the people appropriately qualified, experienced to determine the outcome of a process, such as procurement. But the second is perhaps a more systems process related that we need to revisit. And then the last proposal, I think, is around ensuring inclusivity. On the conversation around the example you're using is water. An all-inclusive discussion, all role players to be brought on board as part of the conversation, so that there is a joint approach on one agreeing on the problem statement and then defining the related solutions that will affect all that are involved. So colleagues, really summarizing those solutions, proposals that are being put forward. And now that we have heard, Mr. Plummer didn't come yet.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
To include
That cannot be Mr. Mhlongo.
the pattern of reporting as a solution. Did we include?
Yes.
But we need to reduce the pattern of reporting.
I think you need to reducing bureaucracy
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
under that element. So colleagues, those are the inputs I thought quite exciting from our three panelists. We have 8 minutes to 12, and perhaps a bit could be added as we're going to rob ourselves of a bit of time on our lunch. So let's open the floor and hear from yourselves first, and then I'm going to give an opportunity to each of the panelists to respond to other inputs from panelists, but also respond to some of the issues that are being raised from the audience. Any takers?
Thank you very much. Thank you. For me, it's just observations. It's not so much a question. It's more just general comments. I don't recall. I'm from EXA. My name is Millicent. I don't recall sitting in the same room as MISA, EXA, South. And if you listen to the conversation, we are all facing similar issues in our workspaces. So again, the notion that we don't talk to each other, we are living that, right?
Yeah.
We just proved that. So for me, it's just really saying there's solutions that can be provided from a regulatory point of view. Municipal infrastructure engineering, but we are not engaging enough of MISA. SALGA, we're not engaging enough of you. So for me, my suggestion is that we start having this conversation. Solutions are there, but we don't know that solutions are there because we're not talking to each other. I've spotted a number of areas where we can collaborate with all of the speakers from your different point of view. There's a role that EXA can play in addressing and trying to bring solutions to some of the challenges that you're facing. We cannot emphasize enough professionalizing this space, right? The dysfunctionality of municipalities continue to increase, and if we go to the crux of what makes a municipal dysfunctional, yes, it's probably governance issues, but a lot of it has to do with, do the people know what to do? Infrastructure is collapsing every day because we are not having people who are professionalized, and it's just not a role to play there. And I think what MISA is saying, that there's no enough engineers, I think that point we demystify, right? We have a lot of engineers. So EXA, I think the president will make this point, but we're trying to fill up the space. We've been absent for a while. We're trying to partner and collaborate with like-minded individuals. This week we met with ESCOM, the CEO of ESCOM, because there's a need there. But we were never the first go-to organization whenever there are engineering issues, and we're trying to change that. And I'd like to invite SALGA to do the same. Let's and see what we can do for each other and to assist the country. The president did say that human rights is really operational at local level. And we are responsible for that in this room. Just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now you've clearly thought about your 5 minutes. Any other takers? Oh, yes. Mr. Plum.
My name is Mpho Banda. I'm from the DPMA. And basically what we do is sector monitoring and local government. So I'm not an engineer. And it's for me what's interesting is we report, right, on what government seeks to achieve in the 5-year space of governance around local government. And we write these reports, and with the view that we get in our little meetings, visit with COGTA, visit with Treasury, and the view that you would normally get is at a very high level. And I think one thing I really appreciate about this conference over the 2 days is that it not only looked at what we within government are reporting to each other, and that can get a bit problematic, because we somehow make certain issues a bit rosy, whilst it's a real problem. And infrastructure, the reality of it is it's a problem. Yes, we have governance problems, and for me, I think, and corruption. But for me, I think service delivery is where citizens really, feel the work of government, the effectiveness of government, and the fact that local government is really not effective. It's the reason why people are so disgruntled, with whatever that's happening. And as for me, coming from where I sit in my position, when I report, I need to report things that are really, root causes to the problem and what needs to be resolved. And just to give you an example, and I'm happy that it's Mr. Naswini, that he speaks, in fact, in him talking, he confirms certain things that, I've been having discussions with Mr. Engineers. During the KZN floods, we were requested to go to KZN, go make an analysis and, provide reports to the presidency on what needs to be done. So obviously what is being reported, media throughout, is that, hey, it's a climate change, a global climate change issue, And when you go there and you sit there, and now you sit with the engineers to basically, we did site visits and we went to the Tongaat water treatment works, and the plant. So when we sat there, we went throughout the plant and we saw certain reports, because there were different groups that were reporting, some to DWA, some to NISA, to COGTA, writing a report on the infrastructure. The reports were conflicting each other, they were just not reconciling. Even the amounts that were, recommended for fixing the infrastructure, they were not speaking to it. But for me, when you sit with engineers at a very, personal level, then you really get to understand what the issues are. And we went to a part where, like I said, I'm not an engineer, but where the water collects itself when there's lots of rain. And we went to see, basically, someone had to be there to open the gate so that the water can flow, so that it doesn't, flood into houses and so on. When we got there, the infrastructure is dilapidated, it hasn't been maintained, there was no way those gates could have been opened. So besides that, it was a climate issue, but there were other, there was a human error in it which could have been avoided had people been doing the work. So I want to speak again to the issue of capacity, that yes, indeed, we may say there are capacity problems, and I've always thought the idea that I don't understand why people say there's lack of capacity within government. we sit there, where I've been sitting, I've worked for government forever. And with people that I've been working with, it's people that are qualified, you know, it's people that have been to proper universities. But, you know, and I think we are using all these excuses on the side and we are not really looking at the root causes. And you have spoken to it, Mr. Masume, that when I spoke to this guy, the engineer from NISA, he said, you know, there's a shortage of engineers in municipalities. Besides that, there aren't any economic benefits. Engineers don't want to work for municipalities because it puts the license, the professional registration at risk. Because you sit there and obviously you work on projects and you've got politicians interfering, you've got senior, you know, management interfering, and basically giving directive of where should these projects be going. And I mean, it makes sense. Why would an engineer, professional person, want to put their job at risk or basically their license to operate at risk when you know you're going to find yourself in such a space? So, you know, from an issue of capacity, I think we need to deal with these other surrounding matters. As much as, I don't know, you know, whether there may be certain areas that need to be amplified, but the issue of interference with the work of engineers is a problem. And that's why we will find engineers not being drawn to work for municipalities for a very long time. So, yeah, that's that. So, but I think, again, on the issue of funding, for me, it's always been a catch-22 situation where you sit and you listen to people saying that municipalities don't have money. And yet we have grants going back to Treasury at the end of the financial year. But I think you've spoken to one part of it, that the procurement process, it's the red tape. You know, there's so many processes that happen in between. And I think it's very important that we contextualize these issues when we report them, that it's not only that the money has gone back, because Treasury will report it that, you know, so much has been received back from the municipalities. So much has not been spent, but we don't really go back to the context of where the problems are. And I'm glad to be really sitting in such a meeting because it then broadens my horizon, you know, in terms of reporting that let's dig deeper than what we are really reporting.
Thank you very much. Any other inputs? You started with a disclaimer, but you did well.
Thanks. My name is Chen. I'm from the Financial and Fiscal Commission, Head of Research and current acting CEO. I think, if you don't mind, my request for it to be more of a conversation, because I really want to just get the ball rolling. First is this OCPO and all those procurement instructions and notes and practice notes. I think someone really has to make direct submission, which is where Christy is myself more than happy to lead on. And in fact, we've been requested by the Standing and Select Committee on Appropriations and Finance to look at this issue. I think it shouldn't come as a surprise that all this sort of hijacking of professional services and very experts and detailed these infrastructure engineering related issues happened around 2014 when there was an explosion of all these SCM prescripts, instruction and practice notes. And that's also when all of this corruption started to seep in. So I agree absolutely with the panel members raising that. So shall we join forces, write very short special submission to the committees regarding this this issue regarding procurement processes and just get those things repealed. I mean, those 2014 and 2015, I saw there was some special instruction about power coil, and some supply contracts about, but it was to do with, I think, something about pipes. That was, just only recently repealed. And the question is, well, if it was working so well and swell, then why do we have to, try and fix some of that? So I think that, and the same goes for, by the same token, right, for other processes, especially that BSCB, CMB, AC. I agree, through recent, through experience with the as accounting officer for the commission, I totally agree with you. It's like that this would work for your purpose, but somehow this whole thing is kind of taken away, and then say, oh, but this one you can do it at just even 10 rand cheaper, we'll go for that. And or some point system that suddenly bumps somebody with 40 points to up to 60, and because the pool is so limited, that's the one you're going to end up with, because it made the minimum threshold, for example. So all those admin and red tapes, I think, needs to be actually eliminated. And lastly, I think on the more technical side, I think President is right today regarding dashboard, because we see all these grants, intergovernmental fiscal relations, transfers, but it's always a question mark as to where did it go, and you can't build a dam in everybody's sort of backyard and things like that. So in these things, it does have geographical points to them. So I think earlier regarding that Google map idea, I think that is the right way to do, where it gives us the powers of Operation Zoom, so you can see actually where it is in the surrounding, and then the viability and feasibility of those plans, and really bring back those decisions, power to decision to the specialist, rather than about the people sitting at Treasury in their offices thinking of, how do I at least on paper make it, look compliant with all these words and tables. So that would be my inputs and suggestion, and I think following this, I would love to make contact with yourselves to finishing as a special submission. We'll put forward as a joint with, of course, Salga's support, which I think is more than it's a collaborative point that we can do.
Maybe we must get a register. We must get a register
of the commission.
What he's saying is exactly what I think we need to do.
Yeah.
Actually, Treasurer has usurped powers of municipal officials and of the departments.
Okay, so as we hand over and we give each of you 2 minutes or 3 minutes, it's eating your lunch, and I'm sure we are fast eaters. It's 10:12 now. 2 things I would also want to hear from the panel on. And so all of us remember that fateful day, 15th of May 2004. You remember the day?
Yeah.
You know? Where were you guys? I remember where I was. When the SEP letter announced South Africa as the winner to host the 2010 World Cup. 15 May 2004. We hosted the World Cup exactly 6 years later. In June 2010. For for 6 years, South Africa was under construction. What went right? Because we have not had anything except for the stadia and the colluding around stadia. Those were not the only infrastructure we put in place. What did we do then right that we can't do as we speak? So are there lessons to be learned from that 6-year period when we really developed infrastructure? Secondly, and I'm quite interested in hearing from all three of you with your different perspectives and outlook on the issue of professionalization. Will we be mad to say that, and the same would apply for accountants, the same would apply for HR practitioners, the same would apply for lawyers, for engineers. If you want to be an engineer in a municipality, you must be a member of EXA. Standing. And once you are appointed, you must retain your membership of EXA. And your inability to retain that membership could also result in the discontinuation of your employment in the municipality. And then we rely on EXA to make sure that one, it on a continuous basis, because we are professionalizing the sector. On a continuous basis, capacitate engineers across the country in municipalities. But secondly, also enforces a code of conduct that says, here is the line. If you step outside of that line, there are processes that we can follow, such as what happened to this chap who is now facing charges in court together with 17 others. That Sidecar has withdrawn his membership as his chief financial officer. And therefore it impacts his ability to secure employment as his chief financial officer. Are we meant to think on those lines? And is that something we should really not be pushing to ensure that properly, we're talking engineers now, but the exact same will apply for, as I said, lawyers, HR practitioners, accountants, and the list can go on. I'd like to hear your views from the different perspectives that you have. Last one, and then we hand over to you for your 3 minutes each.
I fully agree with what Bruno was saying. Just need to put that in there. Very structured. And I think that trust deficit that we have is synonymous to the state of affairs in the country. We just don't trust no more because of the hardship that we are reliving prior to 1994. Because the hope is not yet deferred, but the heart is growing sick, so it is about that. The other thing is that I think technicians, for me, you're right, when to own the system, you're going to own up to what you're going to give to the system. And that is your deposit to make engineers accountable to the work they do and to keep them skilled and sharp and fresh. And then it's all good and well. But you have to carry with you the scourge of unemployment. Because if you have an engineer and you don't have somebody to execute, engineers are very, very particular about their white coats. I mean, he comes with the skill and with an arrogance. Because he's got this thing of saying, listen, I've studied. Some of them very, endowed with humility, but not all. So who's going to do the job? And then you have to have a plan and a plan of action. And you have to have a semi-skilled, unskilled artisan. You're right what you were saying when you mentioned the welding. I mean, welding is something that is a dying art, yet it's so necessary. But with the industries and the wine farms, you go in there and you produce your certificate of code. I've got this code of welding, so I can do the job. You've got different materials. You've got your stainless steel, your arc welding, you've got your thick MIG, you name it. You can't just go on a back welding. I mean, Sasol was not built by people that were engineers. They were built by migrant laborers of the then Department of Manpower, skilled at 21st So, and they got the certificates to do that. Unskilled people become skilled under the guise of the foreign laborers that can be engineers, like you say. You know, DB Thermal and all the guys that were building those power stations, GEC and all those. So this, especially when you're looking at the determination of we talk about the energy sector, which is a problem. Do we have the people to maintain it? I mean, power transformers, all these things, PowerTech builds it. But who's maintaining it? They have schools for themselves. But the person, the artisan that comes out of that school doesn't have papers. Yet he knows the inside of the transformer as the day it was, conceptualized in the engineer's mind. Is it only an occupational health and safety or occupational regulations for high voltage systems certificate that you read in terms of the Department of Labor to get a man into the site? Or is it more than that? We need to look at softer certificates because the certification system is not working for us. It's not upskilling the person. He goes for a course, 7,000, he gets 5 points. Where does he throw the points in? There's no bank to bank that points. You know, accreditation is a slow process, that's painful. Only the time when he's 70 years old, they say, but that is a master in the art that he's doing, yet he's got no papers. And I'm just speaking of experience of my dad. You know, starting with Kuberg, building Sasol 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, going to Medupe, Kusile, Desna Palmatra, you name it, I was very young. And he was off, and I just hear these names. Now I hear the nonsense that's going on there with all these strong pipes and repairs and the penthouses that are not working properly. If you've been there, I haven't been there, but these are the lingo that we speak. So I think you need to make a space for a softer skill in terms of engineering, given the hard skills. An engineer has an expectation, and that expectation has to be fulfilled somehow. He's got to have his team
supporting.
I was thinking that you've got that while it's certificate. Clarifying place. Correct. You choose to start or you finish.
I'll start.
Yes.
No, thank you very much. Indeed, I think it has been a fruitful session. We really have to start and move towards implementation. So I'm happy we've got circulated numbers. I hope we have everybody's numbers that would contribute so that we can start implementing and devising a plan of implementation. Let me start with what the chair has spoken to, continuous development. Yes, indeed. EXA is not going to say we want an engineering professional, and let me repeat that, engineering professional, because there is a misconception that EXA only looks at engineers. No, we don't. We've got engineers, we've got technologists, we've got technicians, we've also got special category, and the special category includes lifting machinery. I've written it here, inspectors in lifting machinery. It's not the thing. It's a certified engineers that we have. We've got inspectors, we've got fire protection systems, we register system practitioners. So when it comes to the softer aspect of making sure we register the people who are actually on the ground, EXA is there. And we also are accountable to those very same people. So we do not leave anybody out, right? It's an entire system in the engineering space. When it comes to the continuous development, we would much rather call registered professions, but not members. Yes, we do devise a plan of saying what value is it to you, because everybody has to have an interest. What is it for me? But we want them to understand that with the identification of engineering work, we're looking at them as registered persons, not members.
Yeah.
Which means it is not a right or it is not a choice for you to register in order for you to conduct engineering work. You must be registered. And simple as that. So we make sure that these registered persons maintain what we call continuous professional development points. You need about 25 CPD points in 5 years. This registration is renewal after every 5 years, but you must indicate and provide evidence that you've maintained your CPD, which goes back to that continuous development of the very same engineers. And we do it through we've got 52 voluntary association bodies that we work with. We've recognized 52 voluntary association bodies. We've got IMISA, which is also for municipalities. We've got the Institute of Electrical Engineers, the Institute of Civil Engineers, the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, a whole 52 number of bodies that work with us in assisting us to maintain the CPD, in housing these engineers for such things like being thought leaders in the space. So we want to make sure when it comes to different topics, we've got a home for these engineers that they can go and discuss and engage and network with people of similar mindsets. We are a regulator, we can't do it all. We have to do our job well and regulate the profession. So that is the vehicles that we provided in making sure we support these engineers. The Vice President of EXA, Mr. Madikane, was with IMISA a week ago when they had their conference in Birchwood Hotel. And I think we look forward to the invitation in November where we will still be engaging with the similar kind of engineers at a broader scale. So that is there. When it comes to encouragement, if you do not maintain your CPD points, you cannot renew your registration. It's very simple. And that is us making sure that as a registered person, you are accountable. And you understand that you are enabled by EXA, you will be empowered by your employee, and we will then also make sure we hold each other accountable along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Let me also appreciate the inputs that came out of this session. And what I think in agreeing with colleagues is let's collaborate. I think out of this, let's have a plan of working together to address the problem and professionalize local government. And what I think was done right, you know, when we were preparing for 2010 World Cup, was to streamline government, private sector, and everybody processes, and came up with a single-mindedness in terms of what we want to achieve. And there was that integration and collaboration between all the role players across the sectors. And the challenge that we then did was to go back to our old ways after 2010, and then we focused on water, and focused on energy, and focused on transport. We don't even think that all these, they actually are a nexus, they talk together. So the nexus planning I spoke about, I think we need to start elevating it more. And we need to simplify, you know, the local government space. I think it's just, we're actually crippling it. You know, let's simplify. We have got so many coaches. You know, you have COGTA, the big coach, you have treasurer, also another big coach. You have water and sanitation from the sector point of view, a big coach, but there is not one game plan. Every coach comes with his own plan, and in the process, the players are confused. Now I'm saying let's simplify, let's at a national, provincial level, let's try and have one bloody DTM 6 to do that. And I can see that there is resistance in adopting the DTM objectives. But we've got to make it where we force it, Lance. From where I'm sitting, I think indeed it is possible that we can still achieve the results we achieved in 2010, only if we try and streamline. think that's my comment.
Okay. I think I did not answer your question about 2010, and you've answered it so well. The golden thread, we've got to love our country, patriotism. I think it worked at that time because we all knew collectively what we were working towards. And in the absence of any other external challenges, we then forget why we are here. But the external challenge now is the risk of South Africa going down. We've got to all love it again. And I think if we go back there, we will go back again to delivery.
Patriotism is very important. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks. I think in 2010, there was no 3-committee system for bidding. The moment they formed a special, an SPV, it now meant what municipalities experience was no longer happening, and things happened. It's the same model that the Gautrain used. If Gauteng government went through that process, we would not be having those trains right now. It wouldn't happen. That's why Mtento Bridge has stopped. The moment you go through our procurements, then something will go wrong. And you are very right. Around 2014, the Office of the Procurement General went random, completely random. And this is happening at a time when in the presidency, before there was a unit that coordinated policy. So all legislation, regulations will come through that process. That was changed. It was called the Monitoring and Evaluation Office. So it was no longer interested in seeing how this legislation will have a knock-on effect, and that there was a very strong team with the even the people who were working there, the policy groups that were working there. One is a dean in the University of Mpumalanga, the one is at UCT, so the policy process became random. And the Office of the Procurement General even passed the regulations that might have been working well for other things but killed infrastructure. One of them is Regulation 28, which said if you are buying, if you receive bids and the lowest bid is too low for your estimate, proceed and appoint that person, because if you don't appoint them and they go to court, they will win, and they are, and then you will end up paying. So I I remember we once did a road somewhere in Gauteng. I had estimated that the minimum is 13 million rands without profit. Just to build the road, the inputs will be 13 million rands. A guy came in 4 million rands. And I had done it, I was expecting that 4 million, because every time we sit for bid spec, the supply chain people used to say, what is the estimate for this project? And then it crossed my mind that they might be doing something with this estimate. So I told them it's 4 million rands. And I even told one of the project managers who were working under me that just don't say anything. I want to see something. And then there was a bid that came for 4 million rands. They were to make sure we still appoint that person, and Regulation 28 was used. We appointed the guy. There was just no way, because I was the only engineer sitting in the committee. Everyone else was anticipating that the guy will get the job. And he went and he flopped. Just after site establishment, you couldn't buy the material because the price was just too low like that. But if you're buying furniture, you already know the supplier is supplying for this much. So Regulation 28 was written very clearly, and it cuts across everything like that. So I think the losses that the government is incurring because of that era are so tremendous. There has been suggestions from FIPTIM and SIPTIM that this is how you should procure for infrastructure, if there's even a standard. I remember taking it out in that argument and saying, But here it says, even CIDB says, if the person is 25% below or above, I can say that this is a high risk. And they say that thing that you're showing us is a catalog or a magazine. The regulation is coming from Treasury. Yes, and it happened on many projects. They will sit again, and they would even preempt. We know what you're going to say. Yeah. So I think that's a problem. Your last question, sorry, was about giving the engineer that responsibility that if you mess up, your license will be revoked. That must be done. But it must not be done in the current context where the engineer is completely beholden to political leadership. Let's, Mr. Vimbat put it very well. Before, there used to be an office of the town clerk. That was the municipal manager. And there was an office of the city engineer, who was very powerful. The town clerk was doing finance and everything, even for the city engineer, but was not interfering. Those offices, in most areas, they were not even sitting in the same building. You city engineer sits somewhere there, town clerk sits somewhere there, but all of them would plan together and the engineer would plan. It was understood that municipal services are engineering services. But then the support function was the town clerk who would check the budget, the expenditure, and so on. But right now, the city engineer is even under the CFO. It's not even a Section 57 employee who reports directly to the municipal manager. And there are very few municipal managers who are engineers. So they have got, yeah, if any, I only knew the former city engineer of Johannesburg 10 years back. That was the only city engineer that municipal manager was an engineer. So if we are going to give the engineers that risk of saying, you mess up, we revoke your license, let's also give them the latitude or the space to exercise. If we can insulate engineers from political influence, right now it's even influenced indirectly through a municipal manager. Put that position there, and it's easy to put legislation to separate. I think that is what these bills were trying to do. But when I go through them, I could see that they missed the most important part. They almost did it, but it's not going to.
Well, thank you very much, colleagues, for all of the contributions. I'm sure that many that saw the numbers when we were in that room had seen a failed or foreseen a failed commission. The total opposite based on the conversations that a few of us have had. I'm quite happy that there will be a substantive contribution made from this commission or breakaway into the plenary session. And we will proceed to make that. We are the first ones to present. And I noted from my phone that there is a challenge on where I was supposed to go. I'm sure you have seen what happened overnight in the city of Johannesburg. Someone there to
change of leadership.
deal with that issue, but I am being delayed. They are not ready. So I will, Gundo, relieve you of the pressure. I'll report in the plenary. If I misrepresent, say that quite clearly in the colleagues, thank you very much. We have taken, we started late, we were delayed, and we are now 35 minutes into your lunchtime. So I'm hoping that they will be gracious and allow us a few more minutes to, if there's still food left.
what funding well, we unfortunately can't represent
We are going to, unfortunately, everything we discuss.
Yes, I will email.
And I make an undertaking to convene us
Yes.
for that partnership discussion.
Thank you very much.
I'm convinced that this must have been a more powerful commission.
Yeah.
Let's
This one
hope
was
so.
more focused. This was more
It's
focused.
not very shady.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think the round table helped more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was more of a cozier conversation. Yeah. All right, let's see if there's lunch for us. Where I work, Mr. Vimp, people go for seconds and thirds. Yeah, as soon as they finish their first meal, they will check if there's more. Let's hope that didn't happen here.
Meanwhile, I think this done with my
Exactly. Unkodile ngoba ngigqoke avalon. Asifuna abantu lately.
Hayi njengoba bathi kuza abantu abazokhalela ixolile ngamaxesha no uyazile
Asifuna abantu lamithi.
sifike kuba ngizokhipha
I know, right. Yazi ne-avalon le. Angithathe le-head office. Ngijwayele ukuza kahle ngeshethi kahle.
noma ngabe baba bowugcokisa into ephelele bengizosinda ngifuna umuntu etafuleni bengingafuneki muntu vele lapha etafuleni which tafel no lapha kusetafula oh bebangakafiki abantu bakhona noma ngabe bekubani so bathi kalena sathini ngicabanga kanjalo abantu njengami bamenzela nge-raisins lokho azakala ufana nami akathanda ukudla lesi nginokusisile nje
and tea.